If you're an American, you've probably at some point played the game Oregon Trail, the mythologized adventures of pioneers during the westward expansion of the United States, taking the perilous 2,000-mile journey while encountering famous landmarks, fording rivers, hunting bison, and most famously, dying of dysentery. At some point, virtually every American school kid was given an hour or two to play through this adventure at school, a library, or museum, under the guise that while it is a bit fantastical, it's a representation of an important piece of our nation's history. But what if this base idea was taken and everything was cranked up to 11? What if instead of a bare-bones management game, there was a constant struggle for space and resources? Instead of bison hunting minigames, a full-fledged real-time tactics engine? And instead of pioneers in the peaceful American West, a group of Czechoslovak legionnaires stranded in the collapsing Russian Empire as the Red Army revolutionaries wage war against the white government? And where your destination isn't the fertile Willamette River Valley, but the frozen deathscape that is Siberia. Welcome to Last Train Home. And before we get into this, I just wanted to disclose that this is not a sponsored video. I've never spoken with the developers, I've never spoken with the publishers, I just think this game is neat and I wanted to share it with you. So let's get into how Last Train Home plays. The game switches between two different modes throughout the journey, a train-oriented side for management and travel, and a combat layer for missions. The basics of the combat layer are pretty familiar to anybody who's played any XCOM style game, only the combat is in real time. The two tutorial missions serve as an introduction to moving your squad, using abilities, finding and picking up resources, sneaking around, and most importantly, exploding everything with your train's giant artillery cannon. As a pretty experienced RTS player, one thing I instantly noticed is that the units go where I tell them to, and the group movement is pretty smooth. Which really shouldn't be praised, but others are still having a hard time with this, so they get some points here. After completing a mission, we're tossed into a victory screen, showing squad members' experience, objectives completed, and loot gained, as well as tracking every single individual bullet fired, medpack used, and grenade thrown. The game makes it very apparent very early that resources are going to matter. In fact, the first thing you do after learning to move is gathering food. And anytime you explore an area, all lootable items appear as white pips on the minimap. I love exploring RTS maps, particularly handcrafted ones, and this actively encourages doing so, which is wonderful. These constant reminders to get loot combined with the early dialogue stressing that the journey is long and supplies are going to get more sparse as we get towards Siberia does a great job at reframing these combat missions. This isn't a game where you empty magazines of bullets into hordes of enemies, but ones where you tactically use your arsenal to protect your soldiers as they complete their tasks so that you can move forward. Once a mission is complete, we find ourselves on the train section of the game. While the RTS portions are all about tactics, the train is about strategy. This section of the game is comprised of a lot of parts, but the core idea is that as we travel through Russia, various points of interest appear. We can stop the train, send a squad to investigate, and depending on where we go, we might try to loot an abandoned village for resources, gather lumber, forage for food in a forest, find traders, or encounter scripted events. These squads have to be formed out of at least 3 soldiers from our legion. Each soldier has a variety of various perks, some positive, some negative, and a bit more ambiguous. For example, Maximilian Drapp is a hunter who can gain food bonuses in forests, but is also ruthless and will get very pissed off if you make passive or defensive choices. While the train is stopped, you can use workers to upgrade the various cars, providing insulation, increasing safety, or capacity. I'll talk more about various train car types later, but upgrading always takes workers and time. These gathering and upgrading tasks are fairly simple. What makes the decisions much more complex is that the same units that are often the legionaries you're using to fight are the ones doing the upgrading and exploring. So there becomes a trade-off. Yosef Mejlik is a worker, but he's also clumsy. If he's helping you upgrade your train and gets hurt in the process, the damage will carry over to the RTS missions. The issue is that he's also your early grenadier, the only person with access to explosives, a very important unit. But if you don't use them to help upgrade, then things are taking more time, which isn't a big problem at the beginning, but is integral later. Is Yosef's health more important than this upgrade? That's a tough question whose answer varies based on your own needs throughout the campaign. And completing upgrade tasks or foraging also gives experience, so you're kind of falling behind by not doing it. And on top of all of this, actions take stamina, which can lead a poorly managed train to sending tired soldiers into the fray, or even worse, having them completely unavailable due to exhaustion. From the get-go, Last Train Home rewards an attentive and strategic gameplay style. Once you get into a rhythm of tactically planning your stops so that you can send multiple squads out to forage for resources, but not too far away so they don't spend all of their stamina getting there, while simultaneously using other workers to upgrade and repair your train cars, and syncing everyone's arrival back home with the completion of upgrades, it feels good. Knowing that whatever threats may approach, you've done your best to prepare for them. Which is important because as soon as you reach Moscow, the Reds derail your train by slamming another one into it and execute your commanding officer for refusing to give up your weapons. They may be fighting a civil war, but that doesn't mean they're going to be civil to us. The tutorial ends with an escape mission where the legionaries find their contact, Captain Langer, raiding a railway station, stealing a new train, and limping out of Moscow with wounded soldiers, broken morale, no resources, and a train in dire need of any upgrades it can get. If it isn't clear by now, Last Train Home excels at atmosphere. The situation is desperate, your train sucks, and every piece of ammo is precious. You're stuck in a foreign land, collapsing into civil war, and can't play neutral. And injuries weren't a problem in the tutorial, but now we don't have a hospital car, meaning careless train maintenance, getting shot, or being gored by a boar when harvesting are tragic. When Captain Langer finally makes contact with the Czechoslovak provisional government, they provide instruction that's either impossible or useless. We barely have any money, fuel, or food, and our commanding officer is dead. The only glimmer of hope is a promised return home, through a war zone and into some of the harshest elements on Earth. And this creates a tight feeling of unity, that it's the train and its legionnaires against the world. The music and voice acting complement this well. The soundtrack is laced with references to famous Czechoslovak music, such as the poems of Bedřich Smetana. And the game defaults to a Czech voiceover with subtitles. It's high quality and I wholeheartedly advise using it. Hearing the reports of Captain Langer read out in his native tongue adds another level to the immersion.
Takže budeme muset prohledávat vesnice a přeskupovat se na určitých stanicích. A to bez poprasku. Je důležité, abychom Rusy nedráždili příliš. Tohle není náš...
Ashbourne Games decided to share an important piece of their country's history and put an absolute trainload of effort into making sure that not only did we learn what happened, but we feel it. Of course, if you're gonna make a setting that is this brutal, the difficulty is gonna have to be there as well. And Last Train Home is a hard game. The RTS fights in particular can be devastating. Individual enemies manning a machine gun can easily wipe your entire 10-man squad if you charge in from the front. Howitzers and other large weapons provide equally as formidable opponents. This is not a game where your soldiers become superhumans who can solo a tank with a rifle. Instead, the focus is much more on stealth, reconnaissance, and planned aggression against enemy positions. Your soldiers can deploy as one of 5 classes that each bring special attributes to the table. Medics can heal and provide buff to nearby allies. Riflemen use high-accuracy rifles and have a bayonet attack that can one-shot enemy infantry without using ammo. Grenadiers have a low-accuracy, higher-damage rifle and toss grenades and deploy landmines, which are the only reliable answers to enemy armor. And machine gunners showcase that Last Train Home is a fair game. They absolutely shred high numbers of enemy infantry when deployed, if you're willing to commit to setting up and justify spending all the ammo it takes. And scouts are equipped with binoculars for reconnaissance and can snipe enemies from a long range. Overall, the class balance is fairly decent. Grenadiers and machine gunners are both integral to fighting entrenched positions or big waves. Rifleman accuracy means they don't look flashy, but they do rack up the damage, and medics bringing the heals and buffs is always appreciated. The only unit I would say is a little overtuned is the scout. The vision they provide is essential, and nobody else can bring it. Their sniper rifles use normal rifle ammo, making their attacks and abilities just a bit too efficient when it comes to eliminating small groups or priority targets. And the rifleman's bayonet attack is bad. It's clunky to use, and it turns out that being in melee during World War I is a very bad idea. But overall, the balance is solid, and everybody has value. I like bringing 1 medic, 2 riflemen, grenadier, and machine gunners, and then 3 scouts for a balanced team. The core of combat is sneaking around, gathering what supplies you can, identifying threats, and then pulling them apart. Setting up ambushes and bringing enemies to you is essential. If you end up in a cover versus cover shootout, it will hemorrhage ammo and supplies. The aforementioned machine gun nests, howitzers, armored cars, and tanks all serve as mini-bosses and skill checks, where a disciplined player can reliably locate and eliminate them. One thing you instantly notice in these sections is that these maps are huge and handcrafted. It's very obvious that for every single mission, the developers sat down and tried to figure out multiple avenues of approaching everything. And that allows you to express your own style of play in a really nice way. Healing and damage in general is also fairly interesting. During each mission, the first time a character's HP is dropped to 0, they're downed. Any character with the stabilize ability equipped can run over and get them back on their feet, but if you take too long, they're gonna bleed out. Anybody that is downed gets a scarred status, a permanent stat reduction. Additionally, taking damage wounds soldiers, giving them a temporary stat debuff that needs rest time to get rid of. And on-field healing does not remove these debuffs, instead it provides a temporary hit point buffer. They can become bullet sponges again, but the wounds are already there. And if they're reduced to 0 HP again, they die. This is an interesting system. It's both incredibly forgiving, but also punishing. It's basically impossible to make a single mistake and lose a soldier. Instead, you then have a choice. Do you want to take this soldier who, if reduced to 0 HP again, is dead permanently? Or do you leave them in the back and continue the remainder of the mission with 9 people? I always like it when a game decides to make things tough by giving you difficult choices instead of just kicking you in the knees and stealing your lunch money. A final thing I find really cool about the RTS parts is that you don't have to do a lot of the missions, and even if you go into them, you don't have to complete them successfully. For example, in this one mission, I was a bit overeager while escorting this convoy. I ran a bit too far ahead, and the convoy is ambushed and dies. So I just leave. I pick up everything on the map that I could and get out of there. The bullets I used and the damage that I took are real, but it didn't give me a game over screen. It just says that despite your best efforts, you couldn't do what was asked of you. Such is the reality of war. It's time to move on, and there are more battles ahead. I really like that. It makes things feel just a bit more real and less contrived. The damage that soldiers take, resources they gather, and everything else done in the RTS missions carries over to the train segment as well. Injured soldiers need to recover, meaning that the rest of the crew has to take up harvesting, crafting, and repair duties as they rest. And every activity takes stamina, which once depleted, soldiers need more rest. This serves as a bit of an anti-snowball mechanism, because once a mission is complete, you're generally coming back with an absolute ton of loot. There's fuel, food, money, wood, metal, cloth, herbs, gunpowder, ammunition, and various consumables that are all looted during these missions. You return home with an exhausted team and a ton of stuff, and now you have to figure out what you want to craft first. I like upgrading all my living spaces first because I'm very bad and my guys need a lot of naps, but I'm sure that better players could manage stamina better and invest in things like improving their train engines beforehand. You also get to level up your soldiers during this time. Characters start with 2 classes, generally a combat class like rifleman, as well as a worker class. These can be engineers who drive the train, workers who upgrade and repair, doctors who heal everybody up, or cooks who, they cook? As they do these tasks, they gain experience in them, they level up and get more stats, so class pairing can be really powerful. For example, scouts love dexterity, and so do cooks, so making sure that your sniper can make some good soup is a really good build. You can grab and level up almost any class for any character as long as they meet the statistic prerequisites, though leveling up more than one combat and one non-combat class has diminishing returns as every single stat caps out at 10. Speaking of stats, one thing I like that they do in the game is not really tell you what they do. Normally, this would drive me absolutely mad. It says that dexterity increases my chance to hit, but by how much? I know that fitness improves my time to aim, but is it a lot or a little? But I think the intentional ambiguity works here. The game pushes the motif of venturing into the unknown in every aspect. Having more dexterity is good and will help you, just like having better insulation, more skilled train drivers, and crafting lots of soup. You never know exactly how important these things are going to be, just that they're good and you should do them. All of the non-combat classes are just nice because they provide real, tangible benefits even in combat, but they're easy to level. You don't really need to think about it. Everybody is always busy, and being busy gains experience. If you have 6 workers, you're almost never min-maxing to figure out which 4 should build something. Instead, you just split 3 and 3 and build 2 things. Everybody gets experience, and it isn't too fiddly or too difficult to manage. But occasionally, you will mismanage something. Maybe one of your important workers will run out of stamina right before a combat mission. Now you can't deploy them, but there is an option if you're willing to risk it. Items like stimulants or vodka can fully restore the stamina and morale of a character, and they only have a 1% chance of overdose. How bad could it be? As you progress through the game, a few other mechanics are added on to the train section, one of the most important being threat level. As the Reds start to win the war, wait, is that a spoiler? It happened like 110 years ago in real life. Is basic history a spoiler? Spoiler alert, as the Reds start to win the war, they become increasingly hostile. Staying in one place becomes a worse idea and will increase your threat level. Random events will begin to occur, like planes flying over, being firebombed at stations, or even enemy strafing runs damaging your cars and those inside. This really brings the focus on the planning element, stopping in an ideal position, sending out 3 squads or more to various locations as you deploy workers to quickly repair and improve things. Grab some of the expeditions that get back early and then maybe pack up and move your train down the line as you pick up the slower groups. Because you can pause at any time and see the path ahead, there's an unlimited amount of strategy you can do here. The game encourages you to set up these increasingly complex plans and then execute them. And when you do, it feels really good. You feel clever. They've created a mechanic that intentionally stresses you, and the way that you overcome it isn't by doing something that's grueling or a slog, but instead something that just lights up your dopamine centers and makes you feel intelligent. Or maybe it's really easy for everybody else and it's only me who feels clever. And another thing I love about Threat is that it totally changes from area to area. If you make sure to read what people are saying, you'll know that some locations Threat builds up really slowly, and in others it's quite dangerous. It doesn't just get harder and harder as the game goes on, but instead follows the story beats. All in all, it's a great system. So I've been fairly positive overall about the game, but there absolutely are some aspects that I am not a big fan of. But there's a problem when it comes to making YouTube videos that if you disperse criticism throughout the video, it makes things seem a lot more negative than they actually are. So I decided to stick everything that I'm a little bit annoyed by into one blob here so we can get it all over with in rapid fire fashion. Let's begin. 1. The squad system for maintaining groups in this game is clunky. You constantly have to reform and disband your groups because you don't want to reuse the same people over and over. They have multiple things they want to be doing. 2. If a unit is in an idle squad, it will not be auto-selected for activities like upgrading your train. It's really easy having a squad of people chilling at home eating all your soup as you're doing other things and not notice the game is completely ignoring them when they really could be helping out. 3. The learning curve is really harsh for new combat things. In the later stages, when you encounter armored cars or various tanks, I think it's fine, but your first encounter with a machine gun or howitzer can be instantly devastating. And because of the nature of the game, that compounds hard. I honestly advise playing through the first hours of the game, getting a good feel for everything, and then completely restarting from scratch for your real run, because the small mistakes can really add up down the track. 4. The rifleman bayonet charge is really annoying and risky and bad. For some reason, it targets a circle to charge towards and hopefully stab someone inside of it, but the fact that enemies move makes the entire thing really clunky, and if you don't land a good strike, you're just a sitting duck and get vaporized. Just let me pick somebody and stab them. And 5. Most of the stations have singular events and things work well, but a couple of times there are some real feel-bad moments because multiple things are queued and they don't work in a good way. This example is by far and away the worst. I had 3 open slots for new legionaries, knowing that I was going to find some soon. Turns out that I found 4, so the game forces me to leave somebody behind. I end up opting to leave a cook out because I don't have a kitchen car. The game then instantly gives me the opportunity to get a kitchen car. There are no actions between these two decisions, and as soon as I make it, the train then allows me, without any negative consequence, to craft more living spaces in my infantry car. So not only did I have to make a decision to send this person off into the aether off of a piece of information that I was going to get 2 seconds later, but it shouldn't have had to happen anyway because this person could have just waited around for 30 minutes and then we all could have gone, but I guess he's gonna live in Russia for the rest of his life. Sorry, Ivan. 5 things that I have issues with is really not that much. Most of the issues are just clunky management aspects that require more clicks than they need, but I do kind of feel bad about Ivan. This final bit is where it gets fairly tough to talk about the game, because I really want to talk about Siberia. The game hypes it up, telling you to be prepared over and over, and despite me taking those warnings very seriously, my experience was still brutal in the best way possible. But in the end, I'm making this video because I like this game, and I want you to go play this game and earn the climactic payoff yourself. So I'm gonna leave it at this. Siberia drives home the fact that Last Train Home is not a game where the main antagonist is the Red Army, but instead them, the environment, and the desperate search for resources are all equal in the hierarchies of villainy, and they all compound for this agonizingly long final stretch. So instead of Snowy Deathland, I'm going to talk about the game's characters and storytelling for a little bit. Much of the story is told through short cutscenes with Captain Langer's writing as he acts as an advisor and gives his input to the player. One thing that I like is that he isn't just correct about his advising, but instead he provides his opinions about things from his perspective. When you make choices, if you just go with whatever he says, it's not necessarily going to be correct. Outside of these decisions, both the player and Langer are basically absent from the game. The majority of the interactions are through the soldiers on the train. When soldiers go out to forage for supplies, it doesn't just give a list of what they found, but instead highlights each soldier's individual contribution to the effort. Each of the over 40 Legionnaires' portraits, names, and statistics are unique and handcrafted. They banter with each other during missions and it's fully voice acted. They discuss what's happening, they have real personal opinions. When I referenced XCOM earlier, it honestly does Last Train Home a disservice because these are true characters, not procedurally generated balls of statistics. In my experience, there are far too many soldiers to build up a personal bond with everybody, but I ended up with my own favorites due to the unique happenstances of my own playthrough. Take for example, Pavel. This boy is a careless doofus who's only really useful for holding a rifle. He has a high chance to hurt himself when working and has worse work efficiency than normal, so if he doesn't end up in the infirmary, he's still slow. But late into the campaign, I ended up in dire straits. Almost my entire crew was in mortal danger, and this absolute legend refused to get hurt, refused to get sick, repaired the train, installed heating, and foraged, all without a single incident. This deeply flawed character, who most will shy away from using, became my hero. And that's really cool. And because he's not procedurally generated, it just became a little bit more special to me. I hope that your playthrough's Pavel is even half as blessed as mine was. Last Train Home is just a solid game and experience. A team decided to mix and match their passion for games with a deep-rooted part of their history, and it just works. To make myself sound even older than I actually am, this game passes the vibe check, yo, no cap. Sorry. I'm really sorry. Thank you for watching. A lot of strategy games' focus is currently on the big development projects, and I didn't want that to eclipse games like these. Smaller, more targeted experiences are just as important to celebrate, and Last Train Home is something we should encourage more of. But there is one thing that this game lacks that stops me from giving it a higher score. Come on, Ashbourne Games, it's a World War I game and you forgot the flamethrowers. What are you even doing? In The Last Train of Us 2 or whatever the sequel is going to be called, just remember to put some of those bad boys in and we will be golden.